What if everything you believed about your past was a beautiful lie? What if the people who raised you weren't your only family, and a pendant, just a simple feather around someone's neck, became the thread that unraveled your entire identity? This is a story of Elena Martinez, a strong, grounded flight attendant who thought she had put all the pieces of her life in order. That is, until a chance encounter with a quiet, well-dressed stranger on a plane changed everything. He didn't ask for help, but she gave it anyway. What he gave her back was the truth she never knew she was missing. Who is this man? And why does he carry a pendant identical to hers? Why did her biological parents disappear without a trace? And what dark secret did a powerful millionaire once hide to keep her lost? This story isn't just about family, it's about forgiveness, betrayal, and what it means to truly come home. So, before we begin, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional, true-to-life stories. Let's begin. The soft hum of the aircraft echoed gently through the cabin as passengers filed into Flight 2189 bound from New York to San Francisco. Overhead, bins clicked shut, safety cards rustled, a faint smell of coffee and jet fuel mingled in the recycled air. Elena Martinez moved through the aisle with practiced ease, offering a calm smile to each boarding traveler. To the untrained eye, she was just another flight attendant, composed, courteous, efficient. But behind Elena's gentle eyes was a soul shaped by years of quiet endurance. Raised in a small Pennsylvania town by adoptive parents who had done their best, Elena had always carried the soft ache of unanswered questions. The only clue to her origins, a delicate silver pendant shaped like a crescent feather, which she'd worn since childhood. Elena didn't believe in coincidences. She believed in moments small, subtle shifts that could change everything. And this moment, she would later realize, was one of them. In first class, a man sat alone in seat 2A. He had boarded early, his name scribbled on a last-minute manifest change, James Whitmore. His appearance was striking, not due to glamour, but presence. Early 60s, perhaps, silver at the temples, a face both weary and dignified. His tailored navy coat hung neatly on the armrest, and beside him, his hand clutched a small carry-on not for convenience, but with the reverence of something irreplaceable. As Elena passed by his row, her eyes instinctively noticed his trembling fingers wrapped tightly around the handle. She knelt slightly, her tone soft but clear. "Everything all right?" Sir James looked up as if roused from a place far away. His blue eyes met hers, eyes filled not with fear, but restraint, like a man fighting not to let something break through. "I'm fine," he said curtly, voice gravelly but polite, "just not a great flyer." Elena nodded gently, offering him a warm, practiced smile. "Then you're lucky I'm working this flight," she said, a wink in her tone. "I've got a perfect track record, not a single crash on my watch." That got the smallest flicker of a smile from him. Not much, but it was something. As she stood to move on, her gaze caught something around his neck, a silver chain, thin, polished, and hanging from it, a pendant. She didn't mean to stare, but for a second, her body went still like someone had hit pause. The shape was familiar, too familiar. Her heart gave a small stutter. The pendant on James Whitmore's chest was nearly identical to the one she wore beneath her uniform, her one link to a life before memory. She told herself it had to be coincidence. Jewelry designers repeated patterns. The world was full of similar things. Still, A chill threaded its way through her ribs. Midway through boarding, an elderly woman needed assistance stowing her bag. Elena sprang into action, grateful for the distraction. As she lifted the carry-on overhead, James's row fell into her line of sight again. He was staring at the pendant in his palm now, his thumb absently brushing its surface. Not like a man admiring it, like someone remembering something painful. Elena returned to the galley and pulled out her small crew pouch. She hesitated for a moment before unfastening the clasp around her own neck, bringing the feather-shaped pendant into her hand. Same size, same gleam, same pattern, but that wasn't the strangest part. She flipped it over and ran her thumb over the back. A tiny, almost imperceptible engraving. Wow. Her adoptive mother had once told her it likely stood for the woman who left her at the hospital, Maria Wren. The name scribbled on the emergency contact field of her intake form, a name no one could trace. Back in first class. James had leaned his head against the window, eyes closed but his hand still clenched the chain, as if afraid it might disappear if he let go. After takeoff, Elena moved through the cabin with beverage service. When she reached seat 2A, James opened his eyes slowly. Coffee, she offered. No, thank you. Just water. She nodded, returning moments later with a chilled glass and a subtle glance toward the pendant, now tucked half beneath his collar. Elena couldn't hold back any longer. That's a beautiful piece, she said softly. Your necklace? James paused. The glass at his lips. It's old, he murmured. A gift, a long time ago, from someone special. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. My daughter? Elena blinked. I'm sorry, he added quickly, as if realizing how strange that must have sounded. She disappeared when she was just a baby. I had one made for me after she was taken. Her mother had one too. I suppose it was our way of hoping. Hope. The word lingered between them like unspoken prayer. I've had one just like it since I was a child, Elena said before she could stop herself. James turned sharply to look at her. What do you mean? But before she could answer, turbulence jolted the aircraft. Cups rattled, a collective gasp rippled through the passengers. Elena sprang into motion, checking on passengers with swift, confident steps. Her heart thudded beneath her ribs from the shaking or from what had just passed between them. She couldn't be sure, as the plane steadied and silence settled back over the cabin. James stared after her. His fingers gripped the pendant tightly, and for the first time in years, the cold stone of his grief began to crack. The seatbelt sign remained illuminated as the aircraft settled into its cruising altitude. But the air in the cabin still felt charged like the static that hangs in the air before a summer storm. Elena could feel it under her skin, buzzing faintly. Not just from the turbulence. It was something deeper, sharper. She'd barely made it back to the galley when Ava, her fellow flight attendant, raised an eyebrow. You okay? Ava asked, pouring soda into a plastic cup. Elena hesitated, then nodded too quickly. Yeah, just... One of the passengers said something that threw me. Ava didn't press. She had worked with Elena long enough to know she didn't open up easily. Always kind. Always warm, but always holding something back. Like a note she never finished writing. Back in first class, James stared out the window. Thousands of feet below, clouds drifted over the country like giant, slow-moving ghosts. He barely noticed. His mind had drifted somewhere far from the narrow confines of the aircraft. Back to the hospital room, the smell of antiseptic, the panic in Maria's eyes as she screamed his name. She's gone. They took her. James. The next hours had been a blur. Security, police, the nurse crying, the broken crib, the pink blanket left behind. A lifetime had passed in those moments, a lifetime of unanswered questions, of dead-end investigations, of guilt. He hadn't spoken his daughter's name in nearly 20 years, hadn't dared to, as if saying it aloud would shatter what little peace he had left. And yet this woman, this flight attendant, said she had a pendant like the one he wore, said she'd had it since childhood. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Still, James's heart beat uncomfortably hard. The aircraft jerked suddenly, not violently, but enough for every passenger to tense. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief area of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Cabin crew, secure all carts." Ava glanced at Elena. "I'll handle the back," she said. "You good up front?" "Yeah," Elena replied, already moving. As she checked first class again, she found James gripping the armrests, his knuckles white. His glass of water had tipped slightly, a small puddle forming on the tray. She knelt beside him and steadied the cup. "Deep breaths," she said gently. "We're flying through it. Happens all the time." He looked at her. "I don't like not being in control." "Me neither," Elena said before she could stop herself. James tilted his head. "You seem like someone who always is." Elena let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh. "Let's just say I'm good at pretending." She stood to secure the cards. And for a moment, James watched her like he was trying to remember something or someone. After the turbulence passed, the cabin relaxed again. Drinks were refilled, seats reclined, the quiet hum of engines returning as the dominant sound. But inside Elena, something remained stirred. She ducked into the restroom briefly, her hands gripping the tiny sink basin as she stared into the mirror. Her reflection stared back, calm and unreadable, the mask she wore every day. But under it, something raw and unspoken. She reached into her blouse and pulled out her pendant again, the feather, silver, light, always cool against her skin, even after hours. Could it really be the same as his? Her fingers brushed the inscription again. Mem. Wu. Maria Wren. James had said his daughter had one, that his wife had one, and he made as after she disappeared. What were the chances her logical mind fought back screaming that this was ridiculous, that pendant designs get copied, that dozens of girls had been named Maria, that her connection to this stranger was nothing more than airborne fantasy. But her heart, that quiet, still part of her that always knew before her mind did, whispered something else. This wasn't random. This meant something. Later, as the cabin dimmed for rest and passengers pulled blankets around themselves, Elena found herself drifting back toward first class. James was awake, staring straight ahead, as if waiting. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "I gave that up years ago." She hesitated, then slid into the empty seat across the aisle, pulling the curtains slightly to give them privacy. "I know this might sound strange," she said carefully, "but that necklace, it really does look exactly like mine." James turned toward her. "Can I see it?" She reached under her collar and pulled it out. The moment she did, James froze. His eyes didn't widen. He didn't gasp, but something in him stilled. Then, quietly, he reached for his own and lifted it into view. They both stared, side by side, Same shape, same size, same engraving, not just similar, identical. I had this made after we lost her, James said softly. But hers the original, that one belonged to my daughter. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. My adoptive mother said it was left with me, at the hospital, the only thing they had. James leaned forward, eyes glassy now. What year were you born, May? Elena said, May 2001. James's hands trembled. My daughter was born May 2001. The silence between them stretched not awkward, but weighty, a silence built of years and longing and impossible questions. Finally, Elena spoke. I think I need to know the truth. James nodded slowly. So do I. The plane glided smoothly through the night sky, cutting across the country like a whisper. Most of the cabin slept under dimmed lights and soft engine hum, but for Elena and James, sleep was now an impossibility. They sat across from each other in near silence, the only sound the occasional click of the service galley beyond the curtain. James broke the quiet first. She would have been your age by now, he said, voice heavy with the weight of long-buried hope. Her name was Ava. Elena's heart thudded at the name not from familiarity, but from how gently he spoke it, carefully, like saying it too loud might wake a ghost. She was taken. James continued, his eyes distant, from a hospital in Chicago. We'd only had her for 6 weeks. It was a regular pediatric appointment. Maria, my wife, went in with her. I waited in the car. He gave a humorless laugh. We thought it'd be quick. Elena didn't breathe. She could feel where the story was going. When Maria came out, she was screaming. Security cameras showed nothing helpful. The nurse who called her name never existed. The room was empty when she stepped in. No one saw who took our daughter. He paused. She blamed herself. We both did. Elena stared down at her hands. I don't know who left me at the hospital, she said, voice low. I was found outside the emergency wing at a small clinic in Pennsylvania. No note, just a name scribbled on the intake, Maria Wren. It could have been fake, but I held on to it. James leaned forward, struggling to control the trembling in his hands. I don't know how this is possible, but I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Elena met his gaze. Her voice was steady, but inside, a storm raged. Yes, I need to know too. Later, back in the crew galley, Elena stared at her reflection in a narrow silver drawer. Her face looked the same, but it didn't feel like hers anymore. She'd grown up in a quiet town. Her adoptive parents, Luis and Carla Martinez, were good people. They'd given her love and safety, but they'd always been honest. She'd been left at the hospital with no explanation, no history. And now, this man, this stranger, had a story that mirrored hers with uncanny precision. A missing daughter, a silver pendant, a mother named Maria. Could she really be Ava Whitmore? She thought about her childhood, the moments that never made sense, the absence of baby photos, the birth certificate that had been recreated after the adoption. She remembered asking her parents once, why didn't my real parents come back for me? They hadn't had an answer, but James Whitmore might, and that possibility filled her with something too complicated to name, a mix of fear, anger, longing, and something dangerously close to hope. Back in first class, James sat rigid in his seat, clutching the pendant again. He remembered the fight with Maria months after the disappearance, the way she screamed at him in their empty kitchen. You gave up. James, you buried her before we even had a body. He hadn't given up. He'd just run out of places to look. They had divorced 2 years later. Not out of hate, but exhaustion. Every room in their home had become a graveyard of memories. He'd moved to New York. Maria had returned to her hometown in Oregon. They hadn't spoken in over a decade, but if this girl, Elena, really was Ava, he would have to call her. The aircraft began its descent into San Francisco. Morning light broke on the horizon, painting the sky in pale pink and gold. Passengers stirred, adjusting seats and stretching limbs. Elena walked down the aisle, checking belts and securing trays. When she reached James, their eyes met again. "We land in 20 minutes, she said quietly. "I get off in SF. No return leg." James hesitated. "Could we talk more?" Off the plane, Elena thought for a moment, then nodded. "Yes. There's a coffee shop across from the arrivals area. Give me 20 minutes after landing." He gave a small nod, almost a bow. Touchdown came smoothly. The plane rolled to the gate. Passengers disembarked. The airport buzzed with early morning travelers, neon signs glowing through the windows, baristas shouting orders over the clatter of suitcases. Elena walked out last, changed into her civilian clothes jeans, a windbreaker, hair pulled back into a loose braid. She looked like any other traveler. James was already waiting at the cafe. He stood when he saw her, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, two people suspended between two versions of reality. They sat. "I don't want to assume anything," he said, "but I'd like to have a DNA test done. I'll cover all of it, discreetly. You don't owe me anything, but if you're willing." "I am," Elena said, almost before he finished. A pause stretched between them. She looked out the window as sunlight lit the tarmac. "I always felt like a part of me was borrowed," she said softly. "Like I was someone else's story, just misplaced." James's jaw tightened, emotion tugging at his features. "If you are her," he said carefully, "I've waited over 20 years to hear your voice." They sat in silence again, but this time it was warm, shared, a beginning. San Francisco's pale morning light filtered through the cafe windows, streaking the table between them in gold. The silence had settled into something almost comforting, though Elena's mind was far from still. The pendant hung like an anchor beneath her collar. It was strange how something so light could carry so much weight. Across from her, James gently stirred his coffee, not drinking it, just moving, like his body needed something to do while his thoughts scrambled to catch up. Elena finally broke the silence. "What if it's not true?" she asked. James looked up. "What if we take the test, and it turns out I'm just another stranger who happened to wear a matching necklace?" She didn't mean it to sound bitter, but it did. There was a nervous edge in her voice, a layer she rarely let anyone hear. James folded his hands. "Then we move on, and I'll be grateful for the conversation either way." But Elena wasn't finished. "What if it is true?" she continued, her voice now barely above a whisper. "What if I am your daughter, and everything I've built wasn't mine to begin with?" James's jaw tightened slightly. "Elena, I don't want to take anything from you. Not your life, not your parents, not even your name." His voice was low and steady, not defensive, just honest. "I want to know who you are. I want to know, but I'm not here to rewrite your story. I can't ignore the possibility that you're part of mine." Elena looked away, blinking hard. She'd always imagined this moment, what it would be like to meet someone who might be her blood. But in her daydreams, it had been clean, joyful, like a movie reunion. This wasn't that. This was messy, complicated, real. She stood suddenly. I need some air. Outside the cafe. The airport's pickup lane buzzed with honking cars and voices shouting across trunks. But Elena found a quiet spot behind a pillar, pressed her back against the cold cement, and closed her eyes. And for a moment, she let it all flood in. The possibility that everything she believed about her beginning was wrong. The idea that the man inside might not just be a passenger, but her father. The name Ava rang in her mind like a name she was supposed to know but didn't. She thought about Luis and Carla, about how they used to make her scrambled eggs shaped like smiley faces on Saturday mornings, about her mom braiding her hair with quiet, focused love, her dad reading the same bedtime book over and over, never once complaining. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. And yet, this new truth pulled at her, like gravity from a second planet. She returned to the cafe minutes later. James stood when he saw her. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "I just needed to breathe." He nodded slowly. "I understand. Truly." She glanced down at her phone. "I have a friend in medical testing. She owes me a favor. We'll know in 3 days." James exhaled, then smiled faintly like the ground under him had shifted, but hadn't collapsed. As she gathered her bag, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. "What is it? I kept it with me, just in case." Inside was a photo slightly creased, its edges worn, a baby wrapped in a soft, lilac blanket, chubby cheeks, wide brown eyes, and around her neck, even as an infant, was a tiny silver pendant. Elena stared at it, her heart thudding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. "I don't remember anything from before the adoption," she whispered, "but sometimes I dream of lilac." James closed his eyes briefly. Maria made that blanket herself, stitched every corner by hand. Elena handed the photo back. "No, keep it. I want to remember after we know for sure." James nodded, though something in him wilted with the gesture. That evening, Elena returned to her apartment in Oakland. She lived alone, not because she disliked people, but because silence gave her room to think. She placed the pendant on her dresser and stared at it for a long time. Then, almost without thinking, she pulled a box from the top of her closet. It held papers, photos, a few childhood drawings, and tucked in a side pocket her adoption file. She hadn't looked at it in years, but now her fingers moved instinctively. There it was again. Name of person who delivered child Maria Wren. Found outside clinic doors. Approx. 6 weeks old. No address, no signature. She remembered asking her adoptive mother once, why didn't they leave a note? Carla had looked sad. Maybe they thought the pendant was enough. Elena touched it now. The engraving had faded some, but still, those initials remained, Wow. What did it mean that this man, James Whitmore, claimed his wife was named Maria? What were the odds? She lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling, mind spinning. How do you prepare to find your birth parents when you've spent your whole life imagining them as ghosts? How do you fit 2 families inside one heart? 3 days. In 3 days, she would know. But that night, long after the city quieted down, Elena sat up in bed, pulled the photo of the baby in the lilac blanket from her coat pocket. She'd taken it after all and whispered the name like a prayer. Ava. It felt both foreign and familiar, like someone she used to be, or maybe someone she still was. 3 days passed like walking through fog. Elena moved through her daily routines, pouring coffee, greeting passengers, tucking in oxygen masks, but her mind wasn't in the sky. It was stuck between timelines, between two pendants, between a name that might be hers and a history that might not belong to her at all. Each night, she lay in bed staring at the DNA test receipt on her phone, status processing. She didn't tell her adoptive parents, not yet. It wasn't time. And she hadn't contacted James since that morning at the cafe. Something about it felt too fragile, like speaking too soon might break the spell or shatter what little protection she still had over her old identity. She didn't know what scared her more, that the test would be positive, or that it wouldn't. It was early afternoon when the notification finally buzzed. Elena was in the employee lounge, sipping lukewarm tea, staring at the wall-mounted TV that played silent airport news. Her phone vibrated once in her hand. Subject DNA results. Available sender verified genetics lab. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened the message. There were no long paragraphs, no explanations, just one line. Bolded and centered biological relationship, parent-child 99.99% match. Her vision blurred. She didn't cry. Not immediately. The moment was too still, too slow, like time had folded in on itself. She simply sat there, feeling her identity rearrange itself quietly beneath her skin. James answered on the second ring. Elena. Her voice was low. It's positive. A pause on the other end. Then a breath, something between a gasp and a sigh, like 20 years of waiting had just been pulled from his chest. I hoped, he whispered, but I didn't let myself believe. I didn't know what to believe, she admitted. Another silence, not awkward, reverent. Elena, James said, voice thicker now. Can I ask what you want to do next? There's no pressure. If this is too much, I'll step back. I'll stay away. You don't owe me anything. She closed her eyes. The pendant sat cool against her collarbone. I don't know, she said honestly, but I want to understand what happened. They agreed to meet again, this time at a quiet waterfront park in Sausalito, just across the bay. It was windy, with silver waves shimmering in the afternoon sun. James sat on a bench facing the ocean, his hands resting on a folder in his lap. Elena approached quietly. I brought this, James said, holding out the folder. It's everything. Police reports, news clippings, my private investigator's findings. We kept digging for years, even after the case went cold. Elena flipped through the papers slowly. A grainy security camera still of Maria pacing in front of a hospital, a flyer with the word missing in bold block letters, the baby photo again, this time clipped to a report marked FBI case closed. I don't know how you ended up in Pennsylvania, James said. That part, we never figured out. We thought maybe someone who took you had a connection out there, but no trail ever led that far. You didn't stop looking. James looked at her, then eyes rimmed red, jaw tight with restraint. I never stopped. I just ran out of places to look. She closed the folder slowly. You really thought I was gone forever? He nodded. I buried you without a body. That was the only way I could keep breathing. Elena swallowed hard. And then something inside her, maybe the part that had always wondered if she'd been forgotten, softened. Not erased, just lost. Later that evening, back at her apartment. Elena pulled out the pendant again. She turned it over in her hands like it was a language she was only just learning how to read. The feather, so delicate, yet enduring. She reached for the clasp and unhooked the chain. Then she opened the tiny hinge along the feather's base, something she'd never done before. It had always seemed sealed, but it wasn't. Inside the hollow center, she found something small, folded, paper thin, a microfilm slide. Her breath caught, hands trembling. She slipped it into a small film viewer she'd once picked up at a thrift store out of nostalgia. The tiny image snapped into view, a photograph of a woman young, maybe late 20s, holding a newborn. The baby's eyes wide and unfocused, the same chubby cheeks as the photo James had shown her. The woman's hair was long and dark, her features hauntingly familiar. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was a message. This pendant wasn't just about memory, it was proof. She called James immediately. "There's a photo inside the pendant," she said breathlessly. "A hidden one, of a woman holding a baby. I think it's Maria." James was quiet for a long time. Maria had a second pendant made. He finally said, "She had it hollowed." She said, "If Ava ever finds her way back, she deserves to know it was love, not abandonment." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, a dam giving way. All the years of not knowing, all the dreams where she wandered, unseen, untouched, unloved, gone in a single image. She began to cry, quietly at first, the kind of cry that doesn't need drama or sound, just release. Across town, James held his own pendant. He closed his eyes and whispered. She found her way back. Maria. And for the first time in decades, he let himself cry too. Elena stared at the photo again, a still frame of a memory that wasn't hers, yet somehow belonged to her more than anything else she owned. The woman in the picture, Maria, held the infant so close, as if shielding her from the whole world. Her eyes were soft, tearful. There was love there, real love, not regret, not panic, love, the same kind Elena had yearned to see in her dreams as a child, faceless visions of a mother with outstretched arms, always out of reach. But this wasn't a dream. It was proof that someone once chose to remember her even in the act of letting her go. And that truth made the question burn even brighter in Elena's chest. Why? Why would a mother love that deeply and still disappear? James picked her up early the next morning. He drove a modest car, not what she'd expected from a man who once helmed a multi-million-dollar company. But then again, nothing about him was flashy. His wealth clung to him like dust on an old suit present. But no longer the point. "I found Maria," he said softly as he pulled onto the Golden Gate Bridge. Elena stiffened in the passenger seat. "She's alive. She's living under her maiden name. She changed it after the divorce. She's in Ashland, Oregon. Owns a small bookstore near the theater district. Quiet life." Elena turned her face to the window. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" James kept his eyes on the road. "Because I didn't know how you'd feel, and because I didn't want to force her into this. We haven't spoken in over 10 years, but I called her last night, a long pause, and I told her about you." The road north wound through hills and fields, the Pacific coast flickering on one side like a living canvas. The silence between them was thick, but not cold. Elena needed time to think, to feel, and James respected that. About an hour outside of Ashland, they stopped for coffee at a roadside diner. Elena sipped slowly, watching the sun play across her cup. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. James leaned back in the booth, eyes distant. "She was fire," he said, not in the dramatic sense. She wasn't loud, but she burned with purpose. She wrote poetry, taught literature. She believed stories could heal people. He smiled softly. She didn't want wealth. She wanted meaning. And when Ava was born, that became her meaning. And when she disappeared, James's face tightened. She unraveled. Grief took her apart piece by piece. "I think losing you wasn't just pain for her. It was shame. She blamed herself for letting you out of her sight, for trusting a stranger's voice in a waiting room." He paused. "She had a nervous breakdown 6 months after the kidnapping. Checked into a wellness center for almost a year. When she came out, she didn't want to be found." Elena let that sink in. It was easier, in some ways, to imagine Maria as cold, selfish, gone. But this was messier. This was real. A mother's love collapsed under the weight of trauma. A story shaped by fear as much as affection. "She asked if you'd be willing to see her," James said, watching her closely. "No pressure, but if you are, she'll be waiting." Ashland was sleepy in the late afternoon, the kind of town that smelled like books and rain. Elena stepped out of the car and stared at the storefront ahead. Marigold and ink, rare and used books inside. She saw a woman stocking a shelf near the window, long dark hair streaked with gray, a cardigan draped gently over her shoulders, and around her neck a silver chain, barely visible beneath her collar. Maria turned at the sound of the bell. Her eyes met Elena's. Time stopped. Neither of them moved, neither spoke. For a moment, they just stared as if looking at each other through a lifetime of fog that was finally beginning to lift. Then Maria stepped forward. Slowly, carefully, as if afraid any sudden movement might break the spell. Elena didn't wait. She walked into her mother's arms. No words, no explanations, just the kind of embrace that speaks a language older than grief. They sat upstairs in the small reading loft, mugs of tea in their hands. The shelves around them were filled with forgotten stories, thick, musty volumes that hadn't been opened in years. Maria spoke first. "I used to come up here after closing," she said softly. "I'd sit right where you are, and I'd imagine you sitting across from me." Elena's throat tightened. "I don't remember anything. Not your voice, not your smell, nothing." Maria nodded, eyes wet. "That's okay. I remember enough for both of us." A pause. "I never stopped loving you, Elena, or Ava, or whatever name you choose to carry. I need you to know that." Elena's voice was quieter than she expected. "Why didn't you come find me?" Maria's face folded gently, painfully. "I tried, at first, but I was broken, and I believed, somewhere deep inside, that if you were alive, you were safer without me, that maybe I'd already done enough damage." She looked up. I was wrong. Elena didn't answer. She just nodded slowly, deliberately, the way someone does when forgiveness is possible, but still forming. They spent the evening together. Maria made dinner pasta with fresh herbs from her garden. They didn't talk much about the past. Instead, they sat with the present. Elena asked about the bookstore. Maria showed her old poems. And when Elena stood to leave, she turned back at the door. "I think I'd like to come back," she said. "Maybe learn about who I was." Maria's smile trembled. "I'd like that very much." That night, as they drove back to the city, James didn't ask what happened. He didn't have to. Elena looked out the window, her pendant now resting next to the photograph in her coat pocket, and for the first time, she didn't feel like two people split in half. She felt like a story being told one chapter at a time. The following week passed in a blur of cautious hope. Elena returned to work, but her mind drifted often to Ashland, to Maria's quiet bookstore, to the photograph tucked in her coat pocket. They had met again just once so far, sharing tea and a walk through a park where Maria said she used to imagine pushing a stroller. The connection wasn't immediate, but it was real, tender, like music being played from memory, not quite perfect, but still beautiful. James called occasionally, always letting her lead, no pressure, no demands. Elena appreciated that, but just as her world began to settle, the past, as it so often does, came back, not in whispers, but in storms. It began with a voicemail. Elena had just stepped off a red-eye and was unpinning her name tag when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, short message, just a man's voice, calm, cold. Miss Martinez, or should I say Ava. Some truths don't need to be dug up. Some stories are better left unfinished. James Whitmore doesn't always tell the whole truth. Think before you believe everything he says. The message ended there. No name, no context. But the voice chilled her. She replayed it twice, heart racing. She didn't recognize it, and yet something about the tone, the calculation behind the calm felt threatening in a way no turbulence ever had. She met James later that afternoon, as planned, at his townhouse overlooking the marina. He welcomed her in with his usual quiet warmth, offering her coffee, gesturing to the deck. She sat, watched sailboats move lazily across the bay, and then she played him the message. James went still, entirely still. When it ended, he remained silent for a long moment, then leaned back slowly in his chair. His name is Malcolm Rhodes. Elena looked up. Who is he? James took a breath. My former CFO. We were friends once, business partners. He was with me during the search for you. At least, I thought he was. But as the years passed, I started noticing things. Decisions made behind my back. Financial gaps. Silence when I pushed too hard. And I think Malcolm knew more than he ever admitted. Maybe not about your disappearance directly, but he had connections, influence, and secrets. He didn't want me looking for you. I thought he was trying to protect me. Now I wonder if he was protecting something else. Elena's voice was low. You think he helped cover it up? I think he might have had something to gain if I lost everything, including you. The revelation hit Elena like a second identity crisis. First the pendant, then the photo, now this. How could someone do that? She asked, her voice edged with disbelief. Keep a father from his child. A mother from her daughter James stared at the horizon. For money, for control, for revenge. I don't know. Malcolm never had a family. He used to say emotions were liabilities in business. He turned to her. But you're not a liability. Elena, you're the only truth I've found in years. She looked at him for a long time, trying to process the storm rising around them. Then she said quietly, We have to know what he knows. James agreed to arrange a meeting. Malcolm Rhodes now lived in a penthouse in downtown Seattle. Semi-retired, still wealthy, still elusive. Elena insisted on going. I need to see him, she said. I need to know what kind of man keeps a truth buried for 2 decades. 2 days later, they flew to Seattle together. Not as strangers anymore, not quite his family yet. But as two people joined by purpose, James booked a private suite at a hotel. Malcolm arrived precisely at 6 p.m., as arranged, tall, silver-haired, polished in the way that only a man with nothing left to prove could be. He looked at Elena first, then at James. "Well," Malcolm said, his voice as smooth as aged whiskey. "So this is the girl." Elena didn't flinch. She held his gaze. "I'm the woman," she corrected. James gestured to the table. "Sit." Malcolm did, calm, unbothered. "I know why you called," he said, "but you're not going to like the answer." Elena folded her arms. "Try us." Malcolm smiled faintly. "It wasn't kind. Maria had enemies. James, enemies you made. You bulldozed your way through people, made promises, broke others, and when the noise got too loud, someone decided to hurt you the only way they could." He looked at Elena now. "They took your daughter. I didn't know until it was done. But once I did, I had a choice. Burn everything down looking for her, or keep the company afloat. Guess which one I picked?" James's face went pale. "You knew." "I suspected," Malcolm corrected. "I suspected you'd never find her. And yes, I wanted to protect the company. You were falling apart. I made sure we survived. By letting us grieve in the dark," James snapped. Malcolm didn't blink. Grief passes. Business is forever. Elena stood. Her voice was shaking, but clear. "You let them leave me. You chose money over a baby." Malcolm finally showed a crack, a twitch in his jaw. "I chose survival. You chose power," she said. "You chose silence." They left without another word. Outside, the Seattle sky opened with soft rain. Elena tilted her face to it, letting it soak her hair, her lashes. James stood beside her. "I'm sorry," he said again. Elena looked at him. "You didn't lie to me." "But he did, and you trusted him." A pause. "I think that's the part that hurts most, that someone knew, and still, no one came for me." That night, Elena sat on the hotel bed, staring at her phone. She had a message from Maria. Just one line. "You have every right to be angry, but you also have every right to be whole again." She didn't reply, but she kept the message open until the screen dimmed. Elena didn't sleep much after Seattle. The hotel bed felt foreign. Her body was exhausted, but her mind wouldn't quiet too many names swirling, too many memories not her own, and one undeniable truth she could no longer run from. Malcolm Rhodes had chosen silence, but her silence was different. She hadn't told them, not yet. Her adoptive parents, Luis and Carla Martinez, the people who held her when she cried through fevered nights, the ones who taught her how to ride a bike, how to tie her shoes, how to forgive her own mistakes. They had never pretended to be her biological parents, but they had been her real parents in every other way. And yet, she had found someone else now, someone whose blood matched hers. A family that had lost her, and for better or worse, wanted her back. She knew it was time to tell them. But how do you tell the people who raised you that you were never really theirs? She flew back to Pennsylvania on a gray Wednesday morning, the clouds thick like wool outside the airplane window. Luis picked her up from the airport, his face lighting up when he saw her. His hug was warm, grounding, like always. "We didn't expect you this week," he said, sliding her suitcase into the trunk. "I needed to come home," she replied. He nodded. No questions. Not yet. Carla was baking when they arrived. The smell of cinnamon and butter filled the small house. the kind of scent that could almost convince you everything was okay. They sat down at the kitchen table, the way they had for every serious conversation since Elena was 12. "I have something to tell you," she said. Her voice was steady, but her palms were damp. Luis took her hand. Carla turned off the oven timer without even looking at it. "I met someone," Elena began. "His name is James. He's my biological father." Silence, not surprise, not confusion, just a stillness that made her heart ache. Carla looked down at her hands. "You found them." Elena blinked. "You knew. We always suspected someone might come looking one day," Carla said, her voice low. "We just didn't think it would happen like this." Louise squeezed her hand gently. "You've always had questions. We tried to answer what we could, but the truth, we didn't have all of it. We only knew what the adoption file said, and the pendant Elena asked. You said it came with me, that it was all I had. It was," Carla said, "wrapped in a blanket, no note, just the pendant." Luis looked at her, his voice thick with emotion. "We didn't try to keep them from you. We just didn't know who they were." Elena looked at them both. Their eyes were tired, but kind, not jealous, not hurt, just human. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "You never will," Carla said softly. "You can love more than one family. There's no rule saying your heart has to pick sides. Later, after dinner." Elena sat in her childhood bedroom. The posters were gone, the bedspread new, but some things hadn't changed the bookshelf. The creaky floorboard by the window, the old jewelry box with plastic rings she once thought were treasure. She opened her suitcase and pulled out both pendants, hers and James's. She placed them side by side on the windowsill, the moonlight catching on their silver curves. 2 feathers, 2 paths, 1 story. The next morning, she called James. "They know," she said. "My parents." He paused. "How did it go? As well as it could have. They're amazing. Always have been." "I'm glad, but I need time," she added, "to figure out what all of this means." James didn't hesitate. "Take all the time you need." And just before she hung up, she added, "I'm not walking away. I just need to walk carefully." That evening, Elena took a walk alone through her childhood neighborhood, past the ice cream shop that used to give her free sprinkles, past the old movie theater with the torn awning and flickering sign, past her old school, now converted into a community center, and as she walked, something inside her shifted. She realized she didn't have to choose. Her identity wasn't split, it was layered. She wasn't Elena or Ava, she was both. She could carry the quiet strength of her mother Carla and the fierce poetry of Maria. She could hold the steadfast calm of Luis and the reflective sorrow of James. She wasn't a divided girl. She was a whole woman finally seeing all the pieces for what they were. Back at the house, she found Carla on the porch. They sat in silence for a while. Then Elena turned to her. "Did you ever wonder about her?" "My birth mom." Carla smiled softly. "All the time. I used to imagine her with your smile." Elena looked at her lap. "She gave me up, but she didn't forget me." "I believe that," Carla said. "Sometimes love means stepping away. It's the hardest kind of love." Elena nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "I think I want to see her again." Carla reached for her hand. "Then go and come home after. You always can." That night, Elena dreamed of feathers, not falling but flying. The headlines hit the morning after Elena returned to San Francisco. Former CEO James Whitmore implicated in long-buried adoption scandal. Whistleblower alleges suppression of child abduction evidence in 2001. Disappearance. At first, Elena thought it was some kind of mistake, clickbait, maybe twisted from fragments of rumor. But then she saw the source, an investigative podcast, public documents, redacted police files, and one damning interview with a former employee who claimed that in the years following her disappearance, the Whitmore Group buried evidence quietly paid off private investigators, silenced leads, and kept the story quiet to preserve shareholder confidence. Elena's stomach dropped. She hadn't seen James since returning from Pennsylvania. They'd exchanged a few brief texts, nothing more, but now the phone was ringing. He met her at a private garden terrace above the city. The sky was overcast, thick with the kind of air that warned of coming rain. James looked tired, not older, just hollowed out. "I didn't know they were going to go public," he said, "but I suppose I shouldn't be surprised." Elena sat across from him, folding her hands to keep them from shaking. "Is it true?" she asked. "Did you suppress information?" James looked her in the eye. His voice was quiet, steady. "I didn't. But Malcolm did, and I let him. I didn't ask enough questions. I was too broken to see straight, and too proud to admit it." Elena let that settle. "You were the CEO," she said. "You had power." "I know," he said, "and I used it to keep the company alive, not to find my daughter." There was no defense in his voice, just shame, and that, in some ways, made it harder to hear. Back in her apartment that night, Elena stared at the pendant on her dresser. She couldn't stop thinking about what it stood for anymore. It wasn't just love, it was failure, hope, mistakes, forgiveness, all tangled together. Her phone buzzed again, this time from a local reporter. "We're doing a human interest follow-up. We'd love your side. Public sentiment matters. The Whitmore name is trending." Elena didn't respond. Not yet. The next morning, she visited Maria. The bookstore was quiet. Rain tapped gently on the windows. Maria looked up from her counter, her eyes soft but alert. "I saw the news." Elena nodded. Sitting across from her, "They're making it sound like James let me disappear so he could save a company." Maria didn't react immediately. She simply poured them both a cup of tea. "I've asked myself 1,000 times what I would have done differently," she said after a moment. "Should I have screamed louder, hired more lawyers camped outside police stations?" She met Elena's gaze. "But we do the best we can with the pain we're given. Sometimes it's not enough, but it's still all we have." Elena stared down at her cup. "I don't know if I should defend him, or walk away." "You don't have to choose a side," Maria said. "Truth doesn't ask for sides. It just asks to be seen." 2 days later, James stepped down publicly from the board of the Whitmore Group. His statement was brief. "A family should never be lost to protect a legacy. I failed my daughter once. I will not fail her again by defending the wrong story." The media had a field day. Talk shows, podcasts, think pieces dissected the confession. And then came another request, this time from a nonprofit that worked with adoptees and families separated through illegal means. Would Elena speak just once? To tell her side? She thought about it for days. She didn't want to become a symbol. She didn't want to relive trauma that never felt like hers, memories she didn't have, pain she inherited, not experienced. But something in her stirred. This wasn't just about her anymore. There were other Elenas out there, other Avas, other families that never got their reunion. She agreed. The event was small, just a panel at a local university. She stood behind a modest podium in a room of maybe 80 people. Some were students, some survivors, some just curious. She wore both pendants that night, the one she was found with and the one James had made in mourning. She didn't use notes, didn't plan a speech. She just told the truth. I was raised by two beautiful people who never knew where I came from, and then I found a man who had spent decades grieving me, and a mother who stitched my name into a blanket I never saw until I was 24. She paused. My story is a miracle, but it shouldn't have taken this long. And the truth, it wasn't just lost, it was buried. The audience was silent. I don't blame them, not completely, but I won't excuse it either, because love without accountability is just sentiment, and we deserve more than sentiment. We deserve truth. She stepped down, and for the first time, the applause didn't feel like pressure. It felt like peace. That night, James called. I saw the video. Elena didn't speak. You didn't defend me, he said, but you didn't destroy me either. I told the truth, she said simply, and I'm proud of you. He whispered, so proud. She didn't cry, but her voice softened. So am I. Spring arrived early in Northern California. The trees outside Elena's apartment had begun to bloom pinks and whites bursting through bare limbs like quiet declarations of hope. The city was still loud, still complicated. But inside her, something had shifted. The storm had passed, not forgotten, never forgotten, but passed. And in the quiet after, she could hear something new, her own voice. She invited James and Maria over for lunch. It was awkward at first. They hadn't been in the same room in over 15 years. The last time had been in a courtroom, their divorce finalized in silence, grief too heavy for words. Now, they stood in Elena's modest kitchen, unsure where to place their hands, their memories. Maria brought wine. James brought flowers. Elena made pasta, the one meal her adoptive mom had taught her to cook from the soul. No one said much during the first few bites. Then Maria chuckled softly. This reminds me of our third date. James glanced up, surprised. The garlic place. The garlic, everything place? She smiled. You ordered a whole plate of roasted cloves like it was dessert. He laughed. The sound awkward but warm. I had no idea how bad my breath was until you stopped calling me for a week. They all laughed, then real, shared laughter. And with it, the ice began to melt. After lunch, they moved to the couch. Elena pulled out a photo album, not of her own life, but of theirs. I found these in an archive, she said. Most were scanned from your old case files. Maria flipped through carefully. The hospital photo. The flyer. A crayon drawing Elena had once made at age 6, a faceless woman with long brown hair holding a baby. I used to draw her, Elena whispered, before I even knew she existed. James looked at her. His voice broke. I missed everything. Elena reached for his hand. Not everything. You found me, and I found you. She turned to Maria. And I want more time. With both of you. Later that week, she flew back to Pennsylvania. Luis and Carla met her at the gate, just like they used to when she was a teenager coming home from her first solo trip. But this time, she wasn't coming home with stories of layovers and crying toddlers. This time, she brought them. Maria and James. Nervous introductions were made in the parking lot. Carla held out her hand, but Maria pulled her into a hug. "Thank you," Maria whispered, "for raising her." Carla's voice cracked. "She raised us too." Luis and James shook hands, two quiet men, both fathers in their own right, both humbled by the miracle of this complicated reunion. They all had dinner together that night, 5 people, no longer separated by blood, memory, or fear, but stitched together by love, truth, and forgiveness. That night, Elena lay in her childhood bed, listening to the quiet murmur of voices downstairs. It was surreal, 2 sets of parents under one roof, laughter flowing where silence had once lived. She got up and stepped out into the backyard. The stars were bright, clearer here than anywhere else. She used to stare at them for hours, wondering if anyone else was staring back. Now she knew someone always had been. A week later, she returned to San Francisco, but something inside her felt new. She wasn't drifting anymore. She was directed. Elena put in her notice at the airline, not because she didn't love flying, but because it was time to land a route, to build. She began volunteering with an organization that helped reunite adopted children with their biological families. Then part-time consulting, then full-time. She told her story not to gain sympathy, but to give strength. Her voice became a lantern, lighting the way for others still lost in the dark. Months passed. James found a rhythm to his quieter life. He started a scholarship for young women separated from family systems. He called it Featherlight. Maria's bookstore doubled in visitors. Word got around. She started a weekly poetry reading again. Her first poem was titled Found. Luis and Carla visited often. They called Maria and James by their first names now. They all sat side by side at Elena's first speaking event in D.C., and afterward, the 5 of them shared dinner again, like family, because that's what they were now. One evening, Elena stood on a beach alone, the very beach where she used to watch planes fly overhead. She reached into her coat, pulled both pendants out, and smiled. 2 feathers, 1 heart, 1 year later. The crowd in the auditorium stood as Elena approached the stage. Applause thundered around her, not the kind reserved for celebrities or politicians, but the kind that follows quiet bravery, the kind that says thank you for surviving out loud. She stood beneath the lights, now a symbol of something larger than herself, though she never tried to be. "Good evening," she began, voice calm, warm. "My name is Elena Ava Martinez Whitmore. Yes, it's a long name, but I earned every part of it." Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. "I was lost once, then I was found, and now I choose to help others be seen." The nonprofit she now directed, Featherlight, had grown faster than anyone imagined. What began as a few volunteers had blossomed into a nationwide network. They helped adoptees find their biological families, offered legal aid for reunification, and created support groups for parents who'd lost children legally, illegally, or through painful silence. Elena didn't do it alone. James sat on the board, quietly using his wealth to write a history he once let slide. Maria ran a writing program for women navigating post-adoption trauma. Carla handled the welcome calls, and Luis. He showed up to every event with cookies. The whole family, past, present, chosen, had come together not just to heal, but to help. After the speech, Elena stood near the stage, shaking hands, hugging strangers, listening to stories. A man approached her, holding a worn photograph. "This is my sister," he said. "We lost her in 1995. My mom never recovered. I've never stopped looking." Elena looked him in the eye. "We'll help," she said simply. He didn't cry, but he looked like someone who finally took his first breath in decades. That night, back at her apartment, she removed the pendants from around her neck and placed them in a wooden box. Next to it, she added something new, a small feather-shaped pin. It was the logo of the nonprofit. The next day, she'd fly to New York to meet a woman who believed she'd been taken in 1983. And the day after that, she'd speak at a university where students were studying the ethics of family and belonging. Her life was no longer about mystery. It was about meaning. The following weekend, they gathered again, the whole family, for a quiet meal at Maria's bookstore. Elena brought James's favorite garlic bread. Carla brought peach cobbler. Luis, of course, brought cookies. Again. Maria had set up the tables among the stacks of books. Fairy lights strung across the rafters. The place smelled like paper and lemon oil and something softer joy. They toasted with sparkling cider. "To the people who raised us," James began, eyes on Luis and Carla, "and the ones who found us," Maria added, looking at Elena, "and the ones who never stopped loving us." Elena finished. The clink of glasses echoed like bells through the small, glowing space. Later that evening, Elena sat alone for a moment, watching everyone from a distance. They were laughing, Maria reading a silly poem aloud, Carla and Luis teasing each other about who had forgotten the salad, James trying to help but failing at even simple kitchen tasks. It was perfect, not because it was clean or easy, but because it was real. No masks, no missing pieces, just people, mended and mending. And she realized something. The legacy she was building wasn't about her. It wasn't about her story being rare. It was about helping others believe that healing could be possible even in the most fractured of beginnings. She looked down at her phone. A new message buzzed in. "Hi, I saw your TED Talk. I think I might be someone's lost daughter. Can we talk?" Elena smiled. She hit reply. "Of course, I'm listening." It was raining the day Elena returned to the clinic. Not just any clinic, that clinic, the one where a nurse once stepped outside to find a crying infant bundled in a lilac blanket, a silver pendant around her neck, and no explanation in sight. 25 years ago, Elena had been left here, not discarded, not abandoned, but left with a hope, and now she had come back, not for answers. She had those, not for closure. She had earned that, too, but for the child she used to be the one who deserved to be held. Even decades later, the building hadn't changed much. The bricks were still a soft yellow-gray. The name had faded on the signage. Inside, the reception area buzzed with the quiet busyness of any small-town medical center. Elena checked in with the front desk. The nurse was kind. "We're so honored you're here. We remember when your story broke. You've helped so many people." Elena smiled modestly. "I just want to say thank you to someone, anyone, for taking me in that day." They brought her to the storage level where paper records were still filed in metal cabinets. She walked slowly through the hallway, her heels echoing softly against linoleum floors. Finally, she stood in front of the room where it happened, the very entrance, the doorway where someone her mother most likely had placed her. Rain tapped the window beside it, soft as breath. She knelt, gently brushing her hand against the floor, and for the first time, She spoke to the silence. You were brave. She whispered to her infant self. You made it. You were loved. Later that day, Elena visited the children's wing. A new mural had been painted since her time, bright animals, stars, and feathers. The nurses said kids loved the feathers the most. One of the administrators led her to a small office where a teenage girl was waiting. 17, quiet, foster care, no known biological family. She asked to meet you, the administrator explained. She saw your video online. Elena stepped in. The girl stood, nervous, protective. You're her, she said simply. Elena nodded. And you're braver than you know. They sat together, knees close. I keep wondering, the girl said, if I'll ever find out who I really am. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out something small, a silver feather pendant, newly made. She pressed it into the girl's hand. This won't give you all the answers, Elena said, but it can remind you that you don't have to wait to be found to be someone. The girl clutched it tightly, like a lifeline, and for a moment, they were quiet. Just two people, no labels, no pasts, just present. That night, Elena drove to a nearby motel, exhausted but filled in a way that no recognition, applause, or achievement ever could replicate. She stood on the balcony, looking up at the stars, the same stars that had once watched over a tiny girl in the dark, waiting for her story to begin. James called. How did it go? He asked gently. It wasn't closure, she said, because nothing was broken. It was gratitude. I'm proud of you. I know, she said. I think I finally believe that now. The next morning, she wrote a letter. She didn't know who would read it or if anyone ever would, but she addressed it simply to the parent who let me go. You didn't leave me empty. You left me with a feather, and I carried it through every storm. I don't know if you could have made a different choice, but I know you love me enough to give me one, and I've spent my life learning how to fly with it. Thank you. Elena Ava Martinez Whitmore. She placed it on the clinic's front desk. Then she walked away, not looking back, not because it didn't matter, but because it finally could live behind her. Peacefully, on her flight home, she wore just one pendant, not because she had forgotten the other, but because, in her heart, both feathers were already flying as one. 1 year later, Featherlight had helped reunite 214 families. Their website now hosted a digital memorial for the names still missing, the waiting stars. They called them, and at the top of the page, in soft script, every story begins with hope. Some are quiet, some are broken, but all of them deserve to be heard. Sometimes, the most powerful stories don't end with a dramatic twist. They end with understanding, with healing, with people broken, beautiful, and brave choosing to come back together, even after years of silence. Elena's journey reminds us that family isn't just who shares our blood, it's who shows up for us, who sees us, who chooses us over and over again. But this story also asks us to look deeper. How many children are still waiting in the shadows, forgotten by systems, buried by greed, overlooked because of their background, skin, or lack of privilege? How many lives could be saved if we simply paid attention? Let this story be a reminder: love must never come with conditions, and silence, especially in the face of injustice, is a choice we cannot afford to make. Let's stand against neglect. Let's fight for reunification. And let's keep telling the stories that others try to silence. If this story touched you, Like this video to show your support, share it with someone who believes in the power of second chances, and subscribe to our channel for more real, emotional, and unforgettable stories. Stories that heal, stories that matter. We'll see you in the next video, and remember, sometimes the smallest pendant can carry the heaviest truth.